The EU has just launched an online censorship regime, and experts are now speaking up for free speech in Europe. So what has happened? Well, let's start with the basics like the Online Safety Act. The Online Safety Act was originally introduced in 2023, and then this year they added whole new sections to it about restricting website content. Basically, legislation was passed and that legislation was modified to introduce dystopian limitations. Now, the same thing is happening for the whole of Europe. In 2022, the Digital Services Act was introduced. Now, the Digital Services Act overall has some very good parts to it. The whole idea is transparency between social media users, the general public, and corporations. This is where we started to see the legal requirement for posts to declare that they are sponsored on platforms like Instagram, Twitter, and even the law slightly changing with YouTube users about disclosing sponsorships. So at the start of videos, you see a little pop-up that appears in the corner, and originally this was a legal requirement, but the Digital Services Act made sure that it was clamped down on properly. Now, this didn't really cause any major outrage, but the Digital Services Act actually had a second part to it, which over the past 6 months has slowly been rolled out all over Europe. So what's happened? Well, as part of the new legislation, online platforms such as X, YouTube and Facebook must address hate speech and disinformation under the Digital Services Act and its codes of conduct, which of course are both vague and subjective terms that lack clear legal definitions and in practice result in the censorship of disfavoured views. The whole idea behind this is basically linked into the core fundamentals of the Online Safety Act. If a corporation, for example like Twitter or Facebook, has allowed posts to go up on their platform, they've got a limited amount of strikes before they get in legal trouble with the European Union. Now, the core basis and the pivotal factor of the whole legislation comes down to hate speech and misinformation, which both of those terms, even in the European Union's definition in their legal document, doesn't actually have a definition or a defined set of criteria. The European Commission defined hate speech as speech that causes gross offence, which is subjective. Define gross offence. They still haven't. Now, with these blanket laws being placed on social media companies the same way the Online Safety Act has done, this leads to total and complete subjectivity without any definition. And this is majorly problematic. Because let's say we've got 0 to 100 here. 100 is gross offence, 0 is sunshine and rainbows. Most people's limit of gross offence might be here. But what if someone is completely offended by something that someone says here? For example, maybe like misgendering someone by accident. That might cause gross offence to someone, and by definition, according to the European Commission, that is considered gross offence. So to combat this, social media companies change all of their algorithmic filters for everything you post, everything you say online, to set the barrier to here. Anything that goes beyond that line is gross offence and could or will get removed from various platforms. Now, this has been in A/B testing now for around somewhere between 6 to 9 months. It's hard to say, they roll out in different regions, but over the next couple of months, social media platforms are going to be rolling out their new set of filters for social media content, which means we are about to see a whole new level of censorship on social media. Now, we've actually had some responses from people in power that have decided enough is enough and they're not happy about this. But before we get into that, very quickly, if you're looking for a fantastic VPN that has one subscription that works across all your devices, a VPN that doesn't keep logs, make sure you check out Private Internet Access. With my link down below, you get yourselves 4 months for free and 86% off. It's the best way to support the channel, and honestly, it is a brilliant VPN. So make sure you go and check them out at the link down below. This week, more than 100 free speech experts signed a letter to the European Commission warning that the Digital Services Act, the DSA, an EU law, threatens to impose online censorship both in Europe and across the whole world. Signatories of the letter, coordinated by my organisation ADF International, include former VP of Yahoo Europe, a former US Senator, cross-party members of the European Parliament, former President of the American Civil Liberties Union Nadine Strossen, award-winning journalist and author Michael Schellenberger, and many other academics, lawyers and experts from around the globe. In warning about the worldwide impact of the DSA, the experts' letter reinforces concerns from the US Ambassador to the EU, Andrew Puzder, and Google in recent weeks that the European legislation threatens to impose censorship beyond the EU's borders. And a good example of this, and it's a case study that they've raised, is the Online Safety Act. At the moment, we currently have Ofcom going head to head against US companies about how they operate, their financial expenditure, their earnings reports, and how they operate within their own countries, because the internet is global. And this is the same thing that's going to happen. Yes, this may be an EU silly little law, but this will affect the internet for the entire world. These significant interventions show there's a growing coalition of high-profile figures who are aware and increasingly vocal about the deep problems with this legislation. The European Commissioner's response to free speech concerns like these until now has been to deny their validity and claim the DSA merely creates a safer digital space. Where have we heard that before? But as this week's letter reinforces, this position simply does not stand up to scrutiny. Online platforms such as X, YouTube and Facebook must address hate speech and disinformation under the DSA and its codes of conduct. Vague and subjective terms that lack clear definitions, and in practice result in the censorship of disfavoured views. The definition of illegal content which platforms must remove under the DSA is any content that breaches the EU or any member state legislation at any given time. This means that the most restrictive anti-free speech laws in any individual EU country, of which there are fortunately many across Europe, will now be applied across the bloc, introducing a lowest common denominator of censorship across the EU. And this is one of the problems with a coalition like this. What they'll do is they'll essentially take the most oppressive online ecosystem of any country in the EU, and that will become the standard for this whole legislation. Now, I'm from the UK and we're not in the EU, so why do I care about this? Two reasons. Firstly, this is very similar to the Online Safety Act, but secondly, the UK still consults with the EU, and the UK actually has its base legislation based on EU legislation. A good example of this is GDPR. When we left the EU, our GDPR rules were essentially copy and paste of the EU. They just removed European Union and changed it with United Kingdom. Most of the laws and legislation that we have in the UK are the exact same as the EU. The only difference is when it comes to aid, support, paying into the system, and a load of other stuff. Obviously, it's quite complicated, but fundamentally, the UK has the same laws as the EU, and it's probably always going to be the exact same. Nothing's really changed from the legislation point of view when it comes to leaving the EU. Platforms risk crippling fines of up to 6% of global annual turnover for non-compliance with the DSA, but crucially face no penalties if they censor too much content. This creates a worrying incentive for tech companies to err on the side of caution by adopting an if in doubt censor approach. And here's the thing. Free speech and the sharing of ideas and communicating in the Western world is one of the best things that we have going for us. In fact, if probably not one of the only things we have going for us at the moment. In the Western world, you can be gay and proud. You can identify however you want. If you don't like someone, you can say. You can share your opinions, and you can say how you feel without risk of going to jail. Sometimes. Yeah. God. Or at least that's what we've been told. But when you start threatening platforms like Facebook, Twitter, TikTok and all these other companies with severe fines and legal ramifications for not censoring speech, you're basically going the backdoor approach to censorship. You're not telling your population that they can't say what they want to say. You're telling companies that if they allow people to say what they want to say, you will fine them. An additional threat from the Digital Services Act mentioned in the Free Speech Experts letter is the exporting of European free speech standards across the world through the content moderation policies of online platforms. Platforms generally have one global policy for content moderation, which could now be made to comply with the DSA's restrictive approach. And this is what a lot of people, when I see them comment about like the Online Safety Act on this channel, saying that the UK screwed and, you know, like all of this stuff is just bad for the UK or bad for Europe or whatever it might be, or with the Online Safety Act in Australia, it's just bad for Australia. No. As we've seen already from the Online Safety Act, they're penalising companies from all around the world, and these laws are now being spread way past the UK. And when it comes to the European Union doing this, this is going to basically cover the entire world. And it's all well and good people in America saying that they're being protected and they will still have their First Amendment. By law, yes, you will have your First Amendment. But that's not going to stop your experience with sharing your ideologies, thoughts and beliefs online, where the platform that you're sharing those ideologies, beliefs and online with is adhering to laws in other countries, like for example in the European Union or in the UK. Free speech is under attack. So when is all of this finally coming into effect? When are we going to start seeing the ultimate censorship? Well, so far, the European Commission's formal review into the DSA, which must occur by the 17th of November, is mandated by Article 91 of the Act, has unfortunately been opaque and based on the undisclosed surveys sent to unnamed stakeholders. The EU claims that transparency is one of the key principles, but this is often not the case in practice. So fundamentally, by the 17th of November, we're going to see a report issued by the European Commission, which will effectively say how they're planning to roll this out for the European Union and what basically the rules and regulations are. Now, I have a sneaking suspicion that their rules and regulations will be things like hate speech, misinformation, and quite vague terms that don't really have a clear definition, as they've already stated. So we're going to have to wait and see what their legal defined code of conduct is and how platforms are going to be expected to keep up with that. But I reckon by Christmas this year, we're going to have a solid set of legislation that basically means that we won't be able to talk online. I just want to add at this point in the video, I'm a free speech advocate and I firmly take the stance that offence is taken, not given. I believe that there should always be social ramifications for your actions. If I call someone a dick and they call me a dick, so be it, that's the way the world works. But I do believe the government should not intervene or interfere with that process. At the moment, the growing success of YouTube in the Western world has actually primarily come down to the success of free speech laws that have basically protected many countries over the years. The sharing of ideology is what captivates people and captivates sharing new ways of thinking and new ways of communicating with people. The second you start oppressing people's opinions and oppressing people being able to talk about stuff, that's when you go into a full-blown dictatorship, and from there it's a downhill spiral to becoming, well, an authoritarian regime. You're getting closer day by day. Anyway, make sure you check out Private Internet Access VPN at the link down below. Get 4 months free and 86% off, and I shall see you all in the next video.